So a little bit about who I am. So I am a graduate of George Mason University in Northern Virginia. My accent's going to shift a little bit over time, just so that I'm comprehensible to you. I can do the really Australian accent if you like, but it's probably not going to help very much. I do a lot of work with our local law enforcement in South Australia, dealing with multimedia processing, interpretation, and analysis, which is where a lot of this has come from. I also have an adjunct position in the Tallinna Technische Ülikool, the Tallinn University of Technology, where I teach digital forensics over there as well. Let's have some fun. I'd like this to be a little bit more interactive, and I'd like to engage with you a little bit and just see how your mind's going to work with some of this stuff. Now, the purpose of this little video that I want to show you now is partly it's a bit of fun. It shows you how deepfake works. I'd like you to pay a bit of attention as we get some face swapping happening as to whether you can see some of the artifacts that are the tells for this. Notice the right cheek there, just keeps bulging out to the side.
Half of everything is luck, James. And the other half is too easy. Half of everything is luck, James. Fate.
So here we have Elon Musk as 007. This is particularly well done.
Its return, along with all your other equipment. Intact for once when you return from the field.
Oh, you'd be surprised the amount of wear and tear that goes on out there in the field. Anything else?
Well, I won't keep you for more than an hour or so if you give me your
This is
undivided
quite
attention.
impressive technology
We've installed some
that
rather
can
interesting modifications.
take one face, map it onto another face, using a neural network to do
Inside
that.
Your defense mechanism controls. Smoke screen, oil slick, rear bulletproof screen, and left and right front wing machine guns. Now this one I'm particularly keen about. You see the gear lever here? Now if you take the top off, you'll find a little red button. Whatever you do, don't touch it.
Now, why not?
Because you'll release the...
So here we have Jack Nicholson as 007. Once again, quite well done. Just have a think about your reaction. So these videos are produced by using what's called an adversarial neural network, where we take a source video, we take a different source face in this case, and we then map one face onto the other and stitch it across and end up with something that gives us a fairly compelling, most of the time, a fairly compelling view of that video looking like somebody else. Now, what was interesting about your reaction was that willing suspension of disbelief, right? You know that it's going to be entertaining, and you just immerse yourself in it, and you start to believe this. And of course, we do the same thing with movies all the time. Now, here's the thing. In my work in law enforcement, very often the question that I have is this video genuine? Is this image genuine? And it turns out, as you probably all know, it's actually pretty easy to fake an image, photoshopping as we call it. But it's also true that from a forensic perspective, telling that an image in particular is faked is also quite easy. However, it's not necessarily easy for a lay person to be able to see how that works. You've got to go into metadata, and you've got to go into the structure of the way in which that image is built. Deepfake video is becoming easier. It's currently a technology that requires you to have a fairly sophisticated high-end computer on your desktop. These aren't that expensive. It requires you to have some mid-level programming skills, so the sort of programming skills that you would expect a script kiddie to be able to use for distributing malware, and that's getting easier all the time. However, doing this in a really convincing way is hard, because if you've got those tech skills, you've also got to have the scripting skills to come up with a narrative that is actually going to work. So the good news is we're not going to be overwhelmed by deepfake anytime soon in the way in which we are with malware. The bad news is it's the nation-state actors who are potentially in the best position to use this tech for information warfare. So, who's heard of the bullshit asymmetry principle? I'm told I can use this term. I'm Australian. It's something that the term I'd use as a comma normally, but for the sensitivity of the American audience, the amount of energy needed to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude bigger than that required to produce it. Okay? And this is the problem that we have generally in information warfare, is that it's really, really easy to send an email, post some text. What else might we do? We might put up a meme, right? Quite easy generators to deal with. What I want to point out to you today is that we're not quite meeting the bullshit asymmetry principle threshold for deep fake yet. But let's have a look at that. Let's play a little game. Let's spot the fake. 5 images. Which one of those is fake? Who says it's the fig parrot? Right? Who says it's the woodpecker with the woodchuck sitting on its back? A few of you? Okay. Who says it's the Facebook post of some homemade explosives? Right? Who says it's Australian Armed Forces with a swastika? Okay. And who says it's somebody's crop? Here's a hint for you. If you're going to grow a crop, don't geotag the video on your phone. Okay. So before I reveal the answer, part of the answer here is, what's the motivation for posting any of these images? Okay? So I'll work backwards. This one is off somebody's phone. It wasn't publicly posted. This one's caused quite a disruptive discussion in Australia recently. It's actually about 5 years old, that image. The 2 people in Australia that do image analysis, which is myself and a colleague, have concluded that this is real. We have a second image that isn't public that demonstrates a high level of consistency. This is off Facebook. This happened in the US. We have a large number of images from multiple sources showing this, and we also have some discussion that says that this does occasionally happen. So I conclude that that one's real, but this one's not real. Let me show you. This parrot is not real, and if you have a look at the feather structure around the face, you'll notice that it has none. As soon as we remove the colour from this image, all we have is a nice smooth area. So why on earth would you do that? It turns out that that particular image was taken by, produced by a private owner of a sanctuary, John Young of John Young Wildlife Enterprises, who produced this single image, well posed, and said, I have discovered this rare fig parrot, and therefore I should have access to state government funding to have a large sanctuary for this to happen. And my colleague Gail Spring and I concluded that, in fact, this was a faked image. And can I point out, I can see someone taking a photograph of it. That's not a public image, so we're going to have to remove that from the video later. But I did want to show it to you. You can see that there are motivations that aren't always obvious as to why people are faking these images. This is not fake. This is Romario. He's a Brazilian soccer player. He was playing for Adelaide United, and in the midst of a sequence of photographs that were taken by a detective who was at the time the chief of our sex crimes unit, we have an image of a Reebok jersey with an Adidas logo right there in the middle of the chest. That Adidas logo occurred in the middle of a sequence of photographs. What's going on? So I was asked to investigate that. It turns out several things are going on. Notice the second jersey underneath, okay? If you have a look at this particular player, his previous club was sponsored by Adidas. He's wearing something underneath. That, with a combination of the flash going off, the pitch of the pixels on the image sensor and the weave of the jersey and shadow enhancement inside the camera, meant that the camera detected an artifact in here and went, oh, that's something I need to pick up and bring out into the photograph, and the next thing you know, we have something real that is based on something that we didn't expect to see. So we do get unexpected artifacts occurring as well. What else can we do? These two white noise images are actually the fingerprints of two different digital SLR cameras. They're identical cameras, but these are the ballistic fingerprint of two different imaging sensors. So this is a common technique that is now used for tracking images back to the source camera. Now, my PhD student, Richard, who is currently watching this in Australia at some crazy hour in the morning, is currently extending some of this work to modern CMOS cameras and also to look at the impact of temperature. So this is ongoing work, but you can see that there are provenance techniques that we can use to take this forward. Video, just a little bit of tech for the moment. The way that video is coded is that we start with a frame, right, so an image, and then we have our next frame, and unlike film, which is frame after frame after frame after frame, what we actually code is our next frame is made up of, it looks very similar to that one, and here are the differences. So we do that by looking for squares of pixels that are sufficiently similar to the previous frame, and then creating a vector matrix which allows us to reconstruct that image as best we can by simply shifting things around. And what we're left with is a noise field which is much easier to code, and we can reconstruct that image. Now it turns out that there are different algorithms that can be used to create that vector field. And if we can work out which one was used, you can see different algorithms give us different solutions. Okay? Now, it turns out that this is a tell for the particular manufacturer or the particular piece of software that was used to create that particular video. It turns out that we can actually reverse engineer and work out which algorithm was used, which gives us another provenance trail to work out which piece of software was used to create that particular video. So these are another form of forensic process. It turns out that motion vector computation is so computationally intensive that to some extent those vectors survive transcoding. So when you put that video up on YouTube, YouTube doesn't necessarily recode because it doesn't really need to do that computation again. So these particular things survive transcoding. Now, let's have a look back at deepfake. Deepfake is quite an interesting phenomenon. Now, I've shown you earlier on an example where we've got a deepfake video that was a face swap. The more interesting deepfakes are not the face swap, but where we take a particular actor, we take their face, we take it away, we put it back again, and we reanimate what that face does. Right? So this is where you essentially put words into somebody else's mouth. However, your source needs to be fully visible, really, for this to work. So if you've got your face obstructed by your hand going in front of your face or going behind an object, and we saw a few examples of that in that earlier video, then we do get a nice little tell. If we don't get a nice, cleanly defined edge on that face, then we can end up with one frame thinking that the face is here, and the next, the neural network redefines where that mask is, and you end up with these anomalies that your eyes can see. So that's another little tell, is that you get these blotchy patterns occurring from time to time. Teeth, nostrils, blinking, and hair give us nice little obvious artifacts as well. Now, I should point out that deepfake, in theory, could be a whole body deepfake, but in practice, what we're really just seeing is a facial mask transformation, because that's about the limit of what we can do with a powerful home computer. If you want to create a convincing deepfake, is that you need to find a suitable source. So that needs to be a face facing the camera dominantly so that you can actually do something useful and compelling, there's no point in deep faking the back of my head, right? Creating a compelling script so that you've actually got your actors saying something where the willing suspension of disbelief doesn't have to play too much for this video to work. Creating some sort of voice synthesis that's going to be compelling as well, and the associated body actions, so that the way in which that actor is then moving their hands, their throat, their hair, needs to be broadly consistent with what they're saying as well.
And for the international order that we have worked for generations to build. Ordinary men and women are too small-minded to govern their own affairs. That order and progress can only come when individuals surrender their rights to an all-powerful sovereign.
Fake, real. That's a real video. President Obama really said that. It's just that he said it in an entirely different context, and you have a nicely stitched, creatively edited video. So here's what I did with that source.
Good evening. Guten Abend. Bonsoir. Guten Abend. Thank you, Laura, for that remarkable introduction.
I have sped this up for you so you don't have to sit through 5 minutes of speech, but I haven't removed any frames.
And for the international order that we have worked for generations to build.
So that was the first segment.
Throughout human history, societies have grappled.
Now I'll speed this up a little bit. Now, there's a segue, right? There's a cut and a reconnect of this video. Now, the previous version that I showed you, they cut away to the audience at that point so that you didn't see that connection. But when it comes up, around about now-ish.
Those ideals have also been tested here in Europe and around the world. Those ideals have often been threatened by an older, more traditional view of power. This alternative vision argues that ordinary men and women are too small-minded to govern their own affairs. That order and progress can only come when individuals surrender their rights to an all-powerful sovereign.
So this is important because that particular video is what your current president calls fake news. It is real footage, then selectively edited, taken out of context, and then distributed into an echo chamber where that creates discussion and a huge furor over the socialist ideals of your commie Muslim president, right? And that's the narrative that goes around that. Let's have a look at a source video. So this comes from a data set that came out of the Technische Universität München, about a couple of hundred examples. This is a source video, so it hasn't been modified. What she's saying isn't relevant to us. But if I take that video and I then take a mask, right? So this is how this deepfake technology works. I take that mask, and what I can now do is I can restitch that face back onto the same player, and you'll now notice that her hair, in fact, we'll just pause it there, that's fine. Notice that her hair is being caught up in the mask. Notice that there's a sharp edge around her jaw, is that the teeth don't work, right? Those teeth keep getting missing and coming back again the whole time, right? Also, the shadows under the nostrils don't work, and pay attention to the shadow on the left side of her nose. Notice that that doesn't change as her head orientation changes. So there's lots of little tells here. Now, I've deliberately left this as it is because for an audience here watching this on a screen, right, it's quite difficult otherwise to see those artifacts. But they're generally present in any one of these videos. It's just that they're usually masked a lot better and a lot harder to see. To try and visualize that a little bit better, what I've done here is what's called a spatial high-pass filter and a temporal high-pass filter to try and see these artifacts. Notice on the right-hand side that the teeth are quite dominant. So this is the original. And on the left-hand side, which is the fake, we don't have any definition around the teeth. Notice that there's a sharp edge here which incorporates the hair. Okay, so these are the sort of tells that you can use to be able to tell whether this is a real or a modified video. Something else that we can do is that we can actually compare all of the frames. Now, I chose this particular video as an example because the camera is completely still and you've just got a talking head. And what I've got here is a measure of how similar is each frame to every other frame. So as we proceed, you can see the frame is obviously identical to itself, and it's not very similar to all of the other frames. Does that make sense to you? And if I then map that and say, okay, how similar is that frame to each other, to every other one of them, you can see that as I proceed in time, it's obviously similar to itself. It's obviously similar to the frames that are nearby in time, but it's not terribly similar to anything else. So that yellow and red zone basically says those other frames are quite different. Now that's quite a useful technique, because if we then have a look at something like this, and we've got some audio again. This is very recent.
I'd like to demonstrate how Synthesia technology can make me speak 7,100 languages fluently. Why don't we rewind this video and I'll show off my language skills.
Nous vivons dans un monde plus connecté que jamais. Mais la langue reste un frein, surtout lorsqu'il s'agit de contenu vidéo.
想象一下，如果名人们可以用当地母语去和自己的粉丝们沟通，又或者说你翻译的内容帮你打开了一个新的市场。
Eu gostaria de demonstrar como a tecnologia Synthesia me permite falar 7.100 idiomas fluentemente. Por que não retrocedemos este vídeo e eu lhe mostrarei as minhas competências linguísticas?
This is a really interesting video for me because it showed my cognitive bias. I looked at that and I went, I don't think that's real. I think that that's a pure lip sync, right? That was my perspective on this one. Unfortunately, I thought, well, you know what? I'm actually going to use that opportunity to see whether my instinct is right. So I did the same analysis. Okay? What you'll notice now is that once we start, notice that spike there and that spike there in alignment. And as we continue, this section is fairly unique. There's no commonality with anything else. She comes back, she starts speaking in French. It's not common with anything else. Haven't seen those frames before. Speaks Mandarin, doesn't match with anything else. Starts to speak Portuguese, and now suddenly that spike there aligns over here as well. So that same little analytical tool told me that these frames here were common with what I saw near the end of the video. So, if we then patch those together,
Eu gostaria de demonstrar como a tecnologia Synthesia me permite falar 7.100 idiomas fluentes.
Right? You've actually got a high level of identicality there which we can detect. So this was a good result because it contradicted my cognitive bias that says this has been faked. In fact, this was being set up as a lip sync. In fact, they really have done quite a good job of deep faking the way in which the mouth moves. Nice little project there. Let's go back to President Obama again.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time.
Have you seen this?
Even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right. Or Ben Carson is in the sunken place. Or, how about this? Simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. That's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you. And stay woke, bitches.
That was quite convincing, wasn't it? Right? Not only, I mean, obviously, you could suspend your disbelief and go, yeah, that's really his voice, right? You align that with the mouth movement. You align that with President Obama's hand motions that you saw, right? You align that with the fact that he was moving around enough that you felt that it was convincing, right? So from a human analysis perspective, that's quite a convincing little video. But let's do the same thing again with our analysis. And what I want you to see now is that previously all the videos I showed you, the level of similarity was up here near the top. In this case, the level of similarity is now closer to the middle. And what's happening here is that the background is completely still. It is not coming in live from a camera. It is a single image background that doesn't move. And we see when we do this analysis overall, for example here, what is effectively a sock puppet, right, stays very still for a period of time. And nothing gets particularly different throughout that video. So this is a forensic tool that I can use and point out to you. I can tell that this has been faked because this analysis shows that the frames don't move enough. Now, one of the major markets where we see a lot of new and innovative audiovisual technology is the porn market. And just so that, you know, I normally leave my ethics and principles at the door when I have to deal with this sort of material, because you just have to be objective. We talked about objective dissonance or objectivity earlier. What's very interesting is that if you look at the size of the pornography market in general, and I'll simply use Pornhub as being the best known example online, which is the 16th ranked website in the US, and you compare that with the adult deepfakes, which is the dominant website where we have video content that is being created by porn content, then with the face of usually a celebrity, which is then pasted onto the porn actress's face. So this is double female objectivity, right? So you might have to think about the ethics of that. And it's very interesting, incidentally, that Pornhub has actually come out and said, we will not host this material on our website at all, right? Which is interesting when you've got a porn site setting the agenda for the ethics. We will only objectify one woman, not two at a time, right? But the point being that in their view, because the celebrity faces, those actresses have not given their permission, their consent to be on there, they won't host. Adult deepfakes has no such ethical concerns, perspective. This is ranked 22,949 in the United States. So it is not a high traffic website in this country, but it is in South Korea. So it's quite interesting that in South Korea, and that in fact, the dominant use of this particular technology in pornography is in Japanese and Korean pornography, where there's idolization of K-pop celebrities, right? So we are seeing some development here. Now, the other point that I'm obviously not going to show you any of this material, to the extent that I'm not even going to show you some safe for work versions of this material, because I believe it's quite unethical for me to even to do that, is that it is an example where the technology doesn't need to be very convincing or very sophisticated. So you do see a large number of facial artifacts that the producers don't bother to even correct, because the willing suspension of disbelief is right there to be able to deliver that particular content. So, come back to Brandolini's law, the deep fake on the bullshit curve. Here's where I think this is going. Now, this is obviously a graph with no units, but let's have a look at this. Deepfake is becoming easier and easier to produce, right? The software that is being developed to be able to stitch faces from one actor to another actor is becoming more streamlined. The ability to fix up some of the most obvious shadow artifacts, teeth, nostrils, hair, etc., is becoming better. However, the ability to detect is still relatively easy. And by relatively easy, I mean that the amount of effort required to detect and identify a deepfake is currently around about somewhat less effort than that required to produce it. This is going to change. And notice this is a 1/10 scale here, order of magnitude. We are at a point now where our ability to detect deepfake is causing the complexity of creating a deepfake to now go up. So in other words, our countermeasures are causing the development of countermeasures, right? So being defense people, you'll all understand that. Here's where this can go. If deepfake video continues to develop at a rate where we can no longer keep up with the technology and the ability to suppress those artifacts that allow us to identify it, then we're in this out of control mode where the effort required just goes off forever. We may end up in a suppressed mode as well. But that means that we essentially need to stay on top of things. And the good news is that currently this effort here, which requires particularly for frame by frame video to really integrate itself better over time, is a huge amount of computational effort. So that's deepfake on the bullshit curve. Here's the big problem, is fake deepfake. So this is where you have a defendant saying that video's not really me, right? My tattoos have been faked. They've been inserted into that, right? I didn't really say those things. I didn't really have that knife, etc. Now, this is what we get as a defendant statement against fairly compelling multi-camera CCTV all the time. And the problem now is because of the existence of deepfake, right, we now have, for an uneducated judge, a more compelling statement that, in fact, the real video has potentially been faked. And that creates an enormous curve. So we're currently here. Now, that's the bad news. The good news for me as a consultant is that this pays really, really well. I hope that that's given you some insight into this technology, which is one of those tools that is now being used to accelerate the information, disinformation warfare. And thank you very much.